Welcome to Stemiverse podcast episode 28. In this episode, Peter and Marcus talk with Nigel Cartmell. Nigel is the founder of AKL Mini-makers. Started in 2015, AKL Mini-makers delivers parent-led technology workshops for primary and intermediate school-age children. Nigel and other Mini-maker members teach design thinking and maker culture skills for prototyping, electronics, coding, digital design, and 3D printing. The workshops run weekly, are financially supported by parents, and are partnered with Auckland Council and the AUT, which is the Auckland University of Technology. Their aim is to grow with the children until they're old enough to become junior tutors, a wider tutor base enabling an increase in class numbers. In this interview, Nigel talks about his journey to start the Mini-makers workshops as a way to help his daughter to learn and build cool stuff, and to complement what she was learning at school. This is Stemiverse podcast episode 28. Welcome to Stemiverse, the podcast that helps educators become awesome at teaching STEM, be it at home or in the classroom. I'm Peter Dalmaris, and with my co-host Marcus Schappi, our mission is to bring you the experiences of educators, students, and stakeholders who strive every day to make the teaching and learning of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and art better.
This podcast is brought to you by Tech Explorations, a leading provider of educational resources for makers, STEM students and teachers. For a limited time only, go to texplore.com/Stemiverse and receive Peter's latest ebook, Maker Education Revolution, a book about how making is changing the way that people learn and teach in the 21st century.
Hey, Marcus.
G'day, Peter.
Episode 28.
Wow, we're really getting on.
Yes, it's just amazing. Like, we've got some really amazing people lately, and we've got one more today.
Oh, brilliant.
So today we have Nigel. So Nigel is based in Auckland, in New Zealand. It's an amazing place. And he's in charge of a mini-maker club for young kids.
Oh, brilliant.
So he's doing some really amazing things there, and has taken a lot of initiatives, and that's why I thought Nigel would be an ideal guest for our podcast. So thank you for joining us, Nigel.
Oh, yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Welcome.
Okay, good to talk to you guys.
Could you take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about you, your background, just so that we know who you are, and then just bring it to Mini-makers and tell us about Mini-makers and what you do there?
Yeah, okay. Well, I was born in Leicester. Family immigrated to Auckland when I was 8. So I come from, I guess, a background of engineers. When I think about it, grandfathers are engineers. My father's generation, they all went through national service and learnt trades and engineering through the 1950s, so that shaped them. It's a typical trend, though. The younger uncles and cousins, we're all sort of moving into the IT, medicine, accountants, and like myself, architecture. I went into architecture. So I guess that's not an uncommon trend with families these days, particularly from the Midlands of England.
So moving from a trade to like a kind of an engineering or office job, is it what you mean?
Yeah. You can sort of see that across the board, can't you, with the majority of families.
Course, yeah.
So that's my background.
Upward social mobility.
Well, yeah, definitely. And I've always had an interest in aviation from an early age, and I sort of wondered where that came from. I had Vulcan V-bombers flying over my house in England, very, very low. You know what? Have you ever seen what they're like?
Not flying.
Falkland Wars. Yeah. Oh, Falkland War. That was the bomber that...
What's that?
Isn't that the one they used in the Falkland initially to do the bomb? Yeah,
exactly. The V-bomber. Yeah, the Vulcan bomber. And we were obviously in the flight path of a RAF base, and my mother used to scream, and I had to run upstairs and watch this great big Delta fly over the house, shaking the windows. And it was like the opening of the first Star Wars movie. Do you remember when that Delta appeared? at the beginning of the movie. Yeah, I was like, and so I think that shaped my interest in aviation. I've always been interested in museums and entertaining me at a young age. It was always the zoo, I guess, looking at the airplanes at museums. As a teenager at school, I enjoyed science, physics, woodwork, engineering, tech drawing. I could have applied myself a bit better at maths and English, but Shakespeare wasn't my bag, really. I was rather into, let's say, Blade Runner would have been more my thing, I think, at school, but let's not go there. I was always interested in more research outside of the curriculum. For example, with tech drawing, I did a major project by not just drawing an engineering block or just something quite random. I went to the museum and researched how the V1 pulse jet engine worked and drew that. The museum helped me do all the measurements and look inside the engine and etc. So
which museum was that?
I went to, there was a V1 flying bomb on the ground in Motat, so I was able to measure it, and there was one hanging in the air at in the War Memorial Museum in Auckland.
And it was an original, right?
Yeah, and they had
not the copy.
And they had the flat valve grid out the back of the museum, which is the inside of the engine. So I was able to measure that up and take photographs. Yeah, so that's the sort of thing I did, and this is sort of, I grew up in the 80s, early 80s at school before, that rampant consumerism. We did up cars with our older brothers. We're always mending and stuff and making things. And one of the wackiest things I'd done, I've got to say, is I call it like punk innovation. I was co-opted onto a soccer team in short notice, and I needed football boots. I mean, these days I just go down the road and buy something quickly from the mall. But back then I couldn't, and it was a soft ground, it was wet, sort of boggy ground. So I hope I don't regret telling you this. I got some bolts and I shoved them through the soles of my basketball boots. I did a fine job doing that.
Gosh, you wouldn't be allowed to do that anymore.
No, that's the thing. Hasn't life changed?
That's what you had to do.
Yeah, so after that I was known as Thunderbolts at school. And awesome. And for years they still spoke about it, and they wondered why I didn't just donate the boots to school. But it was actually one of those things that gave me a reputation as an innovator, I think, earlier on. What
took you into architecture?
It's quite random, actually. I mean, I was keen on aviation all through school. I left school. I wasn't really, my last year at school, I think I should have really gone out into the world and probably traveled a little bit. But
so you were not engaged in school?
No, I got disengaged towards the end of school. I was more project focused, probably a bit more into exploration. Yeah, it was time to leave, I'd say, in my sixth form year. Fifth form, I did very well. Sixth form, not so. So, apart from hanging out at the beach, sailing and doing stuff that kids do, I joined the air training course. So I worked at air shows. I learned to fly when I was 16 before I could drive a car.
Where did you fly?
I had that opportunity. The Piper Tomahawk.
A Piper. So that's a single engine propeller plane, right?
Yeah, so that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So side by side, sitting side by side. So we started off with that.
It takes two people?
Yeah, it takes two people. Yep. So yeah, that was a great experience. And then when I left school, I went to Ardmore Aerodrome and got a job as what you might call an apprentice mechanic. Worked on one Cessna aeroplane, I think it was a 186, with an engineer rebuilding it from scratch. We did days of riveting. It was a great experience. They taught me a lot.
So how old were you then?
Would have been 17. I left home at 17.
So at 17 you become an apprentice mechanic for aircraft.
Yeah, loosely. It wasn't a formal apprenticeship. It was more just learning on site.
Sure.
Pitching in, doing mucky jobs, and also lots of riveting and disassembly of airframes, things like that, and just observing what the engineers were doing. There was a bit more formal training across the airfield at a place called Flight Engineers. I worked on a top-dressing aeroplane called the Fletcher. They'd start me off on the tail, and the idea was to work my way forward. But the market wasn't too good at that time with aviation. The Air Force weren't taking anyone on, Air New Zealand neither. So it's a mucky job, and I needed to get on with something else. So I guess it was a love, and rather than a career.
Yeah.
And I found my way into a drafting office with Neil Timber, and there was a housing division across the way, and they encouraged me to start my qualifications for architectural drafting. So I did that part-time. And then I've worked on building sites as well, which has been very helpful, doing up houses. And then I guess I did my Bachelor of Architecture in 1993 and worked in architectural practices since then. Went to England in 98, came back in 2007 with Genevieve. I went initially, obviously, with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and we came back with family. Worked at Warren & Mahoney Architects 2007 until 2012.
So I wonder, when you joined Neil Timber as a trainee draftsman or draftsperson, did you have
just a draft
as a draft? Did you have any inclination that would be something that you wanted to do in the years prior to that, or was it purely like a coincidence that you joined them? It was like an opening.
Just one of those things.
Well, so how did you find the first few days or months of being in that kind of role and learning the stuff that you were learning? Because before that, you were working hands-on with planes, which was, I suppose, your love, as you said.
Yeah, well, it was still fascinating because I guess the tech drawing background, I had involvement on building sites through families, friends of family. For example, my friend's father was a builder, so we used to work on the building sites a lot. So I wasn't unfamiliar with buildings, putting up timber frame buildings. So Neil Housing was a very large company, and they supported you, so they trained you.
Right.
So it was great. And yeah, but just fell into it and carried on. I was 19 years old, so you're still very malleable back then. So.
Flexible. Suppose it's the mechanical mind, problem solving. Suppose that you developed over the years. That made it like, I suppose, not an easy transition, but kind of natural. You can do a lot with a kind of mindset.
Yeah, I don't remember it being a problem. It was more just getting over the fact that perhaps I just had to give up on a love, airplanes and that kind of thing, and. It was a better lifestyle. It was a lot cleaner than working under airplanes that had pesticides on them or fish fertilizer, and things like that, or crawling down a fuselage, painting the inside with PA10 primer and getting high on that stuff. So
that sounds good stuff, like chemistry.
Yeah, it's a lot easier, should I say? And you could, but I must say I learned a lot, and down at the airfield, and I was always invited down when there was a maiden flight for a plane that was done up like the Hawker Sea Fury that the mechanic I worked with, he did that up with another guy, and I was always phoned up and said, I'll come down, have a look at this. So it was always, I maintained contact with the airfield.
That's a great experience. I know that, and as a maker now, you are into drones and remote controlled planes. We can talk about that later, but I can see how that developed over the years to still be a hobby and your love. So it's not forgotten.
It never leaves you. It never leaves you, to be honest. And
I know you're having fun. So I'd like to go fast forward now and try to understand how all that, like you're now an architect, how that leads you to Mini-makers today.
By chance, funny enough.
What chance?
Well, okay, let's say I know back in 2010, while at Warren & Mahoney, I was researching how to do low-level aerial photography. And I was thinking, okay, we could apply that to architecture because, Google information wasn't that great back then, and we needed up-to-date, let's say not geospatial, but just aerial views. And it was just, again, I could do some remote control flying, etc. So, and also there were some graduates in the office who inspired me a lot. I mean, they kept feeding me information. For example, the DIYdrones.com page. That was that's a great source of information. So in the office, there were these young graduates, and they were quite tech savvy, very tech savvy. A couple of them had bought quite a large CNC machine, and they were modelling stuff on the side, starting a business of their own, which was quite admirable. Another guy, David Hayes. Now, he was you could sort of see how the profession would change. He had taught himself electronics and coding, I think, from the age of 12. He'd studied architecture as well. Now, he wrote an app that transformed the way we did on-site defecting. We didn't need rolls of paper. A large job, this was a 16-story job I was working on, needed A1s and AOs. I mean, we were walking around after he'd got this app going with an iPad, and it was live. It was fantastic. So when I sort of looked at the way he could, with his background in coding, and he said he wasn't a great coder, how he could change the way we worked. And that's been in the back of my mind since leaving Warren and Marnie. I got into the maker movement, unfortunately, I'd say, because of the Christchurch earthquakes. I've been on a job for 18 months. That sent ripples through the economy, and when it came to the end of my job, there was actually nothing to move on with. So architectural firms were shedding staff around that time, let's say, January 2012. So I could have gone back into the workforce, but I had a long list of DIY house renovation work to do, so I just moved on with that. And kind of in a way, I wasn't glad to leave, because I loved working in that company. It was great. They're a great bunch of people. But it was a good time to have a sabbatical. And my lovely wife, she's very supportive. She just, it's like we were a tag team. She just got back into her job and developed her career. She was at home with Genevieve, and it was my turn.
Great.
And so I got involved in Genevieve's education. I've now become her PA, really, which is something quite cool.
So Genevieve is your daughter. And
Genevieve's my daughter. She's 11 years old now, and I remember a conversation we had from age 8. I was saying to her, look, why don't we just make some really cool stuff? Because she's quite arty. She loves building things, and she's had a lot of influence, I guess, with our DIY work. So I went to these Google Make groups, met a guy called Tim Carr, Andrew Dixon, Jacko van der Merwe, Richard Fortune of Wellington, and they got me onto AUT, Auckland University of Technology collab. And there's this group of makers, kind of a loose organisation of about 40 people. We had a Slack network, and we just feed information. It was great to have that number of like-minded people in the space. So I tried to open up a maker space at my daughter's school without going into too much detail. It just wasn't the right time. Primary schools weren't thinking about teaching kids coding. It certainly wasn't in the Ministry of Education curriculum.
So that's 2013?
That's, I'd say, 2012, 2014. Yep. I'd say 2014, yeah. I did a fair bit of research, pepper potted, between my house DIY. And there's a lot of change.
Your DIY on your house, did that have anything to do with electronics, programming, automation, or was it more things like, let's change our roof tile or put a balcony in the backyard?
No, unfortunately, I hadn't gone that far. I mean, 2 years ago, I hadn't started on Arduino or anything. I didn't know. It would have scared me playing with an Arduino 2 years ago, but now I'm quite comfortable with it. So,
but the important thing is that you had the time, right? You had the time as part of your sabbatical, which was triggered by your DIY projects and deciding not to go back to work just yet. And that triggered you joining the AUT, or Auckland University of Technology, in the makerspaces and connecting to other makers.
Yeah, but the problem was the makerspaces, the infrastructure just wasn't there in Auckland. I mean, 2012, it was quite different to today. It's changed a lot in 5 years. And also, to answer your question about the house DIY, to be honest, it was a lot of painting, building a new kitchen, framing, plasterboard, you name it, real sort of physical stuff. So no, not a lot of, I would like to do some automation in the future, but not yet. I knew the local board out in I'm trying to say it, Puketapapa. It's a Mount Roskill, used to be called Mount Roskill. It's in central Auckland. Mm-hmm. They're a very forward-thinking local board, and I did prepared a submission for getting maker movement principles or the opportunity to open a maker space at a community level. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of serendipity in that meeting, and they were quite excited by it. So we ended up getting maker movement written into the local board plan, which was quite new, and that's shared amongst the Auckland local boards and council. So I don't know what effect that had, but in the end, I think it led to the opening of the creative lab that we use today.
And Nigel, can I ask you, why get into all this trouble of opening up a makerspace and doing submissions at the community level? What was your motivation behind all this? Because you could just paint your house. Like you didn't need really more work, right?
I think I sort of knew something had to be done. I guess it was out of frustration. I wanted, not frustration. I thought we could change things. I mean, I'm involved with a larger group, 40 people, let's say, we thought we were talking about this infrastructure in Auckland. Could we get maker spaces opened?
Were you trying to fix something? Because I know that...
Yeah, trying to... Yeah,
I know that you're
trying
working
to get something started.
You were working on projects with Genevieve. Was that perhaps a motivation?
Well, yes. I mean, the problem we had at the time was you couldn't, getting the right venue was quite difficult. I mean, all the school halls had been monopolised by, let's say, the local karate club or religious groups.
Yeah.
Also, they didn't have Wi-Fi as well.
Yep.
That's only
quite necessary.
Been recent. Yeah, so that's quite recent. So I'd say what happened in 2015, I started pilot workshops at a local school. I borrowed 18 laptops from a really nice guy called Brian Lawrence. I just phoned him up randomly, said, can I borrow 18 laptops? I knew he had a recycling company. And he said, well, I've got 300 spare laptops out back, so you can have 18.
That's nice. Did you have to repair them or?
He did. He had agreements with corporates, so any old laptops and PCs and IT gear went to him, and he repurposed them and got them into school. So awesome. I didn't realize it would be that easy to get 18 laptops, to be quite frank. So
you need to ask the right people.
The phone. Exactly.
And what software did you put on them?
We taught the kids SketchUp, Tinkercad, and Sculptris. The objective of the February workshop was to prove, I guess, to Genevieve's school, I guess that kids can at 8 years old learn how to do digital design and 3D printing. So we also teamed up with a company called Diamond Age. They manufactured 3D printers in New Zealand, and they ran the workshop. Helped, should I say, run the workshop. I did the design side of things, and they helped with teaching the kids the Tinkercad, etc. So I knew more SketchUp than they did. But yeah, we worked well together, and the kids just loved it. We had 18 kids in the room. Funny enough, of Genevieve's year, that was 11% of the kids in Genevieve's school year from her school.
Wow. So can you describe how did that work? Was it like a single workshop in a month, or was it a recurring event?
Well, there were two workshops we did, 2-day workshops, 18 kids in both classes. And again, there was a hiatus till about October because looking for a space was difficult. Then I got an opening in Genevieve's school, and we teamed up with Code Club Aotearoa and ran coding sessions, should I say, 2.5 hours, similar to the ones in February. They were about a 2.5-3 hour session.
I wonder for our listeners, perhaps, because it seems to me that you took an initiative there to do something for students in your daughter's school, and you pitched that to the school, I suppose, so you can get space. And then again, you pitched it to school and parents, perhaps, so you can get students. Is that how it worked out? And can you tell us about the pitch itself? What did you say that you can do for the school and for the students? Perhaps this is a lesson that our listeners can take if they are thinking of doing something similar for their school.
How do I frame this? I mean, back then it was quite different. Schools, I think, are a bit more receptive in Auckland, New Zealand, because the curriculum has changed. Back then, the curriculum had ignored technology a fair bit, and really, I mean, it was trying to convince schools to do this. They didn't need to if they're ticking all the right boxes. You know, they were getting great academic results at Genevieve School. The pushback I got from the principal was, for example, that technology is too didactic. So try and work that one out. So and so I mean, the whole purpose of starting this, building a culture, was it was a lot easier to work within a culture than actually doing it by yourself. I mean, sure, I could have paid for a tutor to come to our house, just teach Genevieve and I, but it's better to start the culture and then have weekly goals to work to, because again, you've got a club. You move quicker. So I think I've answered the question there. Without getting into too much detail about schools' responses to makerspaces.
So even though in New Zealand and Australia, I can see that happening as well in other parts of the world, technology obviously is more integrated in school curriculum than it used to be.
Yes.
Do you still think that a club like yours still has a place?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're moving quite quickly now. What I find is schools, it's like a big super tanker, the whole school system, and it's slow to change direction or even implement a new idea. But once it gets going, it's fine. My group, the Mini-makers, it's more agile, and we would respond to anything that the schools do. So, for example, this year, Genevieve School has started teaching the kids to code. So, I mean, eventually it would take the emphasis off teaching coding to the kids and more emphasis on the making, which schools don't necessarily do, because I guess they're concerned about health and safety and those kind of things. So we would do more project-based stuff in response. But yeah, I mean, there's always a place for what we do, and I'd like to see us merge with the schools or actually collaborate.
Could you give us some examples of projects that you've done in your club? I'm looking at your Facebook page, and I can see here that you've been sampling local waterways and analyzing water, so science experiments. You are playing around with octocopters, with environment sensors, and a lot of really interesting projects. Could you just pick a couple representative ones and tell us what were the benefits for your students?
Okay, well, I could talk about the progress we made from February last year, which was critical because we weren't really going anywhere until we partnered with Auckland Council. And it comes back to that creative lab in Wesley Community Centre being built. And then one day, Jacko came to my house for a coffee and he goes, "Hey, you still looking for a venue?" And I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "Well, the centre's open. They're looking for people to fill it, to use it." So I was like, great. Went down, spoke to the council, and it just went off with a bang from there. We were teaching, running classes twice weekly, and So what we did, we started off with SketchUp and Scratch, then we moved to Emboss. But let's say May 2016, we were running out of material. So one of the tutors, Mary Kim, she suggested we start the kids on the Spark Fund curriculum,
Oh, wow.
Yep.
teaching Arduino and C. So, Mira said that, look, that's how I started. And these were, I guess, 9 to 10-year-olds last year. And then we worked through the curriculum till about October. And then we shifted to more project-based direction because I got all excited about the accelerometer. We were using the MPU 6050 six-axis accelerometer. I was like, yeah, this is great, So we did some gyro stabilization projects. We made a mock autopilot and then a camera gimbal, 2 and 3 axis camera gimbal. And the kids just loved it. We were balancing coins on this paper aeroplane or cardboard aeroplane. You might see that in the Facebook page videos. We did PIR activated cameras, and towards the end of the year, the kids were building their first Arduino robot and beginning to program it. So,
was that the Redbot, or did you make it from scratch?
Built it from scratch
Awesome.
with the assistance of the supplier. So, so there was lots of soldering. We taught all the kids to solder, and the tutors from AUT were just laughing because they were going back to uni, revving up their mates, going, "Look, they're 10-year-olds who can solder better than you can."
That's great.
So yeah, we didn't have any injuries. Just one poor kid, sort of lovely boy, held the soldering iron the wrong end. That's about as bad as we've got.
I've done it.
I must say, yeah, most of our injuries were actually glue gun injuries. That was probably the most biggest weapon of mass destruction in our workshops. So yeah, this year we experimented with addressable LED strips, and the kids loved those because it was interactive, and we started putting sensors on them. I'm just looking through my notes here. Lost track a little bit, but okay, yeah. The citizen science introduction was term 2 this year, and there's a challenge. Oh yeah, we found E. coli, high levels of E. coli in the local stream.
Yep.
That was interesting. So from that, we had a challenge from the scientist at NIWA. Can you make me a decent incubator that can be used by citizen scientists group? So yes, we're starting on a prototype with that, and I've made a 3D printable prototype, so it should be ready in a few weeks.
How are you heating it?
We've got some heating pads.
Okay, Peltier.
I think there's 3 or 5 volt heating pads, and then there's a small little computer fan that keeps the air flowing like an oven.
Cool.
And we've got 3, whether that's necessary, 3 temperature sensors in there, just to make sure it's all matched up. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so we're also using that ESP8266 chip.
It's a little Wi-Fi module.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi module can link to a mobile phone app. So yeah. So early days with that. We'll see how it goes. It's taken a while to come out of the 3D printer, but it's looking good. That's one of the projects I have to do and introduce it to the kids and say, look, this is what we can do. So
how do you go about introducing a project of that complexity to the kids? Because that's beyond university level.
Well, that's the thing. The tutors always have a giggle when they turn up to the workshops, because they're like saying, we started this at our first year at uni, and the kids are enjoying it. But to me, the philosophy behind doing these projects is, if they don't take it in 100%, eventually they will. Let's start at 20%. They get a little bit of it, then they understand the principles later. It's a bit like when I was a kid, even at their age, we were pulling apart lawnmowers with older brothers and doing up cars. Couldn't ask me to put a lawnmower together, but I sort of know the principles, how things go together, and so it's the same thing. If you just keep repeating the process and how it's done, it clicks. Some are learning faster. Yeah, so some are learning faster than others. Like osmosis for sure.
Could you tell us, in your experience with your Maker Club, some of the harder periods in the kids' learning journey? So, what are the kind of things that they, I suppose, stumble across that then you try to help them out by, or a mentor does, or because I'm sure it's not all fun. There's some periods where it's harder than others.
Yeah, one of the impediments we've come across was actually getting things built, because the 3D printer that was supplied by the council wasn't that reliable. I mean, it needed maintaining all the time, and I guess we weren't knowledgeable enough in that area. So with our LED lamps, it's been a bit of a bottleneck getting stuff laser cut at AUT, because it's an all-day affair going there with the car, parking it in the Auckland Council car park, and sitting there and feeding the stuff into the machine. It's not,
Is that what you do, or do your students do that?
Oh, the students wouldn't be able to do that. They'd be at school, and I just have to do this during the day.
Right. Now, I was thinking of places or times in like in the students' learning journey where they get frustrated or stuck with something. Just wanted to see what kind of techniques you use to help them get through those periods.
We have a higher number of tutors. So we have about a 1-to-4 student, what am I saying?
The ratio.
Student ratio,
Yeah.
Which is quite you can't do that in a school. So what we do is we just have tutor numbers there, and really the questions are asked in different ways. I mean, frustration. I'm not saying we're pushing the kids to the limits, but we make it fun. And if we make it relevant, and you might have seen what we did with the mousetrap, for example, how we triggered the mousetrap using the.
Okay, I was going to ask you to describe the mousetrap.
Oh, we're just trying to. When we teach the kids a lesson or something like that, we try and do our best to put a narrative into it. So there's a sense of purpose. So, for example, we use the tilt and impact sensor and an infrared sensor for use of a possible pest control trap, rat trap. If you've ever come across the Predator Free New Zealand by 2050 initiative that they're running here, it's sort of along those lines. So there's a story there. And it shocked them a bit when I said, "Oh, look, how about you bring your own rat in and we'll have a go." And they're like, "Oh my God." There's a lot of humor in the class, and as keeping the kids engaged, you just keep talking to them and show them ways around a problem. They're not just left there to sort of be blank faced or anything. That we're constantly at them. If they look like they're not doing anything, we'll just talk to them. It's as simple as that.
So that 4-to-1 ratio between students and mentors, that's very impressive. I suppose that's one of the differences between a school-run maker club that runs during their normal class time and something like what you've made. Like I think it's very hard to achieve that kind of ratio in a normal school situation. And it's also an ingredient for preventing frustration, keeping students, I suppose, in the zone as they're progressing towards the goal, which it's something that you have put in a story, like the mousetrap thing, that there's a story there. The student is part of the story as they're building whatever they are building. So these elements put together an experience that is far from frustrating. So you're in the zone, you're progressing towards your goal, and you're learning a lot. Is that how it works?
Exactly, and it's also that the tutors are different as well. I mean, they're younger, they're in their 20s, they relate well to the kids. And we've got Michaela on board as well. She's 16, and the girls love her, and it's just the tutors. It just seems to work. And what we've found, if we go up to, let's say, 1 to 6. You feel it as a tutor. You think you're just going nowhere, and you're getting bombarded by questions, and it's a bit too daunting for, I guess, an untrained teacher. So we seem to manage to keep the momentum rolling at 1 to 4, and to keep them engaged and focused. Yeah. I think that's the primary.
How do you go about acquiring tutors?
Oh, I'm very fortunate there. I ring up Harry Silver at AUT and I go, "Help! I need a tutor." and he puts word.
That seems to work.
He puts word out on his Facebook page, and then I get an email. Simple as that. I've got tutor loyalty. I've got tutor loyalty as well because rather than volunteers, we pay them as well for their time.
So it's who you know again.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's important because when you think of it, one of the goals is to get the tutors off driving trucks or serving ice cream, and things like that. It's the number of postgrads I see just wasting their time. I mean, sorry, postgrads, but I mean, it's a pity to hear that postgrads are driving countdown trucks or something like that.
Or now it's driving Uber.
Driving Uber. I mean, there's other ways. There's got to be other ways that's relevant. So it provides employment as well, helps them develop their career.
Nigel, could you describe us your plan for taking over the world, say in 2018? What's in the future for you?
Oh my goodness, I don't want to.
We're not telling anybody, just between us.
Yeah, no. Honestly, my focus at the moment is, I mean, we've started off with February last year, we started off with 24 kids, 2 classes of 12. There seems to be an ideal number in the lab of it's lovely at about 10 to 12, sometimes down to 7. It's great. You just feel a calmness in there and you get a lot of momentum. Big numbers aren't our goal. It's quality. Yep. And we're growing with the kids. We're not taking on new blood, younger kids. The reason for that is I'd like to see we've got now a hard core of 10. I'd like to see those kids become the tutors and run it later, and we take more of a back step. So as far as world domination goes, it's just getting them. I mean, we've got to get them through down puberty as well. You know, excuse me. Yeah, we've got intermediate school next year, and they've got a lot to deal with. Yeah, a lot of obstacles, and just keeping them focused. And can't conquer the world. I mean, perhaps I could work correspondence courses or something like that. I could help.
That's a relevant way. I was just a bit cheeky when I said that, but it's more of a relevant term, like what is in your future. And the world is like, it's your world, not necessarily the global world we call Earth. But how do you think that your group will change over the next year? And I think you've answered that. So you're sticking with the cohort that you have because you want to see them through as they grow older, and you actually grow older with them. I mean, in the way that you run the group. But for the benefit of our listeners, do you think that your method of running, or your approach to running a mini-maker group, is something that anyone can implement in the local school, the local area? What kind of advice would you give them?
Firstly, if I was school administration, I would engage with specialists. Teachers aren't trained to keep up to date with technology. They've got enough on their plate with report writing, and the ratios are too high. 16 or 20 or 30 kids to one teacher is just not going to work, because you have to dumb everything down to keep the kids engaged. So, you're going to stick on MIT Scratch forever, or maybe onto just Python or something. As far as project work goes, it's harder. I'd say if there was ever a skill shortage, you can engage perhaps some graduates. So you need to get some young people in who relate to the students as well, bring the tutor ratio down to like what we've got. How do you engage with schools? I mean, I'm finding that schools have their own KPIs. It's very hard, very difficult to mesh with them, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, we could integrate as best we can, but it's really up to the schools to embrace groups like mine, parent-led. I mean, how many parents are like me as well with the spare time to do this?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, you've put a lot of effort and time in this, and not everybody has that capability and the free time. Do you think it was worth it after all this time? Could you have done something different with your time? Have more fun even?
Well, no, to be honest, I could have ignored everybody and just gone to uni and done a degree in mechatronics or something. But at the same time, I didn't really want to go back to school. So this is one way of myself learning. The process pathway might be a bit slower. I'll end up returning to architecture probably soon, Also, I love working with Genevieve. And
as a job again?
Yeah, I'd say so. Okay. I'd say so. I just return as a job, probably not so full on doing large buildings. I might just do residential scale. I'd say that would be my goal. Keep the club running part-time. And because now we've pretty much got everything established, all of the networks are in place. When you look at it that way, we could scale up, but that's another level. But at the moment, I think the next 2 years, getting the kids through intermediate school, puberty, how they change up to like the age of 13, that's going to be our major hurdle. Keep learning.
How have the kids in the club, like your daughter, of course, and then the other kids, as you're following them through the years, how have they changed? Their outlook, the things that they're interested in? Tell us about the changes you've seen in the kids.
That's a good question. I've seen kids who were quite unfocused and class clowns become very focused. I've seen my daughter, for example, She is doing some amazing stuff with code. She seems to have cracked C. She's doing, I'm asking them questions, and if you might see on some of the videos, I'm going, how did you do that? The kids keep surprising us with what they're doing, even with the LED strips. I like what Gina did with her narrative of Bob and Ben or something, and then red and blue lights crossing each other. They do their own thing. And I think what we've got to do is keep encouraging them to do personal research. I mean, here's the other thing with the membrane keypad. I gave it to a couple of the girls who were ahead. One of them was Genevieve, and I was thinking, oh, okay, we're not really prepared for this. And next thing you know, the girls are just looking up on the internet how to use it.
It's pretty cool.
Yep. So they know how to research, right? They've cracked that. They know how to find things out without your help. They're independent.
Exactly. I'd say 6 months ago they weren't there. Now the advanced ones are starting to do that, and the others will follow. Oh, this year, at the beginning of this year, we took on 4 kids from a local low decile school. I don't like dwelling on the fact that they're from a low decile area, which is poorer. It makes no difference as far as I'm concerned. They were thrown in the deep end. The other kids were a year ahead of them. They were thrown in the deep end. And I said, look, you're going to start on Arduino and see, and they surprised me. They didn't need to start on Scratch. They went straight into Arduino.
Oh, right.
Is that because they were exposed to Scratch previously, or
no? They had no prior knowledge. Straight into Arduino.
That's amazing.
Are you shocked?
Blasphemy.
And I am quite surprised at that. I mean, you just challenge the kids. They seem to just pick up the ball and run with it. But you've got to be there to help them. I think the kids' biggest challenge is you're there to break it down into the small steps. I mean, if a classic, if you've ever read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, it's the classic romantic split. I'm trying to get them away from just seeing the big picture and just getting scared, of this big picture that you can't break down into small bits. You've got to teach them to break things down into small, manageable parts and then deal with each part. That is really the underlying purpose of the club.
So make sure that the kids are not overwhelmed, right? That's the essence of breaking things down, the small parts.
Yeah, and they see how you do that. For example, this term, I did introduce design brief writing a couple of terms ago, and we've got them started on, let's say, their own projects this term. Not all of them are fully confident, but it was just a test. You just got to try them out. I mean, one of the first questions I said this term was, who's ready to start their own project?
So what's a design brief? Could you describe that?
Well, you've got to say, what is it? What is its purpose? When you look at let's say 4 stages of design thinking, you've got to have a purpose. You've got to have a need. Obviously, you've got to have, that is the purpose, a need or a wish, or you haven't got something. So it's a problem. You've got to start with the problem, and then you've got to think of a solution. You've got to build a prototype, and then you've got to go through that design iteration. I must say that is the hardest thing for the kids to do, because design iteration, they have to understand that the prototype is not where it finishes, or the prototype doesn't have to look flash. These are, in this consumer world where pretty much every kid thinks that technology is something you buy from Leeming or Dick Smith, smartphone. It's an artifact. It's not an artifact. Actually, technology is a process as well. So trying to instill into these kids that nothing is perfect until you've gone through that development stage. And I'm not saying that they'll reach nirvana yet, but, we'll set them along that path. I think that'll be the hardest thing for them to do is accept that what their first prototype and second prototype aren't perfect. Then they have to get the confidence to build and model it and change it and fail and break. Agile. Scrum and Agile people.
Creativity is iterative.
So you brought that design thinking from your world of architecture?
I'd say that's come from architecture, yeah. I mean, I've even worked with people that when I was managing jobs, I mean, I passed on changes to them, and I remember one particular guy, he wouldn't change things after the third attempt, even though I'd redlined it clearly. You know, even adults can't do this. You know, so I mean, teaching kids that resilience at an earlier age to keep working on something.
Yep.
And there's a sense of ownership as well, because, I mean, if you buy something, you play with it, you just chuck it in the bin when when there's really nothing else to do with it. You can actually make your own things. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an attachment. I mean, I think Chris Anderson did write about this as well in Makers, you know, the new industrial revolution. There was some psychological attachment to something that you understood.
You've got a stake in it.
That could be it. Yeah. So yeah, we're working on that.
Right.
Citizen science changing. Yeah, perhaps with citizen science we could change the world. You know, we'll get those drone projects flying and take some aerial photographs eventually.
So, yes. You know? I was going to say, so what are you going to bring back to architecture when you go back into the workforce?
Okay, well, 3D printing architectural models would be quite easy to do. Oh yeah, we've bought a 3D printer March this year, so I have that at home. I've become more familiar with 3D printing.
What'd you get
now? I got a box from 3D printing systems. The reason why I went that way is with that machine rather than Ultimaker is because it's reliable. I mean, I found out that Weta workshops use it. I phoned them up.
Yep.
You know, I phoned up Weta. I did what Marcus did to Chris, only I didn't get the phone slammed down on me. And that's the beauty of New Zealand, you know. That's what I will say, that New Zealanders are wonderful in that you can just phone pretty much anyone up, even Jacinda Ardern. You can. I've heard you can phone her up and ask how to pronounce her name. So yeah, I phoned up Weta Studios and I asked them, you know, what have you got? And they said, oh look, we've got 12 of these things and we've thrashed them and we've only broken one, and I've heard now they've got something like 25, so they're fine. So it's a very reliable machine.
That's very good to know.
Yeah.
And so is 3D Printing Systems, that company. When we did our Kickstarter project, we did everything on 3D printing. We had 5 3D printers, up boxes from 3D Printing Systems, and the support that we got from them was great.
Oh, so you run one as well, do you?
We did a Kickstarter a few years back, and we used one of the boxes from 3D Printing Systems, and yeah, that company was great.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, I'm going to a Google meetup tomorrow, actually, with the distributor. He started his meetup.
Who's a New Zealander?
Bruce, good old Bruce, yes. I'll say hi to Bruce for you. He's got some interesting projects, I've got to say. So as far as next year, I mean, he's prototyping some swarm robots. As far as teaching the kids machine learning and AI, I mean, that we might do that next year. I mean, we'll build these robots that we have now, and the robot arms and everything else that the kids want to do, but I'll introduce those next year at some stage once he's ready.
How much do you think that the topics that you introduce to your group, because you have keen interest in them, rather than what the students want to learn?
I thought initially, I mean, you could joke that, oh, Nigel, you're doing this for you and not for the kids, but I did take my hexacopter drone to the first workshop. And I said, look, hey, what do you think of this? And they rubbished it. So they said,
what? Seriously?
They said, that's not a drone. That's not a drone. That's not going to fly. You know. So I'm like, oh, you're so cruel. And no, so they were more into robot arms and Bluetooth speakers.
Disappointing.
Genevieve will.
You should try again with that.
I did say to them, look, we'll teach you how to fly RC remote control planes at a local model club, and they perked up for that. So especially when we'll use a simulator, because I like to get them started on a simulator first.
Got to insist. Hey, Nigel, apart from the design and art of motorcycle maintenance, what other books or book would you recommend to people? What has influenced you, actually, to be more specific in doing what you're doing now? Okay, so if you look at architecture-wise, the Dutch modernists are great people. I like the Dutch. I love the Dutch. They certainly know how to maximise what they have. Mm-hmm. So I'd say... Is there a particular book? Oh, no. I mean, you talk about Aldo van Eyck and
Hertzberger. They're quite old now. That kind of. There's also Glenn Murcutt. There's Brenda and Robert Vale. I've been influenced by. I liked Earthships. If you look up Earthships in New Mexico, if you're into sustainability, I must say, right bleeding edge at the moment. There's a guy called Joris Lahman. He did the bone chair, and he's also building a 3D printable bridge using robots that are built. You'll see that link. I've just put it on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm looking at that.
Yeah, that's where it's going to. I mean, really, when we go back to architecture, the link between your piece, one's PC as a designer and the prefabrication plants and robots is just going to get closer. Now, he's writing for the bone chair. His group wrote an algorithm that mimicked the growth of bones. So there's structural efficiencies in there, and it sort of raises the question: how much will the computer take over the design process or design development? Because the design iteration in this case was done by the computer. It morphed the design into something very efficient. So that's something. I mean, also what's going to happen when we reach AI? Are we going to talk to the robots and say, how are you going? Like rather than offering a beer to the workman, you'll offer a battery to the robot. I don't know how it'll go. So also I'd say makers, Chris Anderson, when you don't ring him up at 4 a.m.
I looked at the time zones. I have a general sense of awareness.
You did. I have faith in Chris Anderson. Makers, the New Industrial Revolution was a good book to read. Aviation, Alexander Lippisch is certainly, and the Horton brothers, way back in the war, certainly somebody to read about. Their designs were influenced by nature. I mean, they developed tailless airplanes, which are very efficient. I'd say Sustainability, Cradle to Cradle by William McDonough and Michael Braungart. So that's about regenerative design. I think everyone should read that. Plus many, many more books. So they're the main ones I thought about.
Well, you're going to keep us busy. Got a lot of reading to do. Well, it is Christmas coming up. We're going to have a little bit more time for reading, so I'm going to look through your catalog and pick a few. I was looking at Earthship Biotecture. There's a lot of very interesting pictures. Just to look at the pictures there of what kind of designs people come up to build homes, right? This is mainly for homes that are efficient in terms of energy consumption, efficient in terms of materials used and so on. Quite interesting. So thank you for that. We're going to put all that in the show notes.
Yeah, I mean, that's where when you look at Earthships, you can see Arduino, the use of Arduino in there.
Do you think you could have, say, a bio or Earthship or Bioship project in your group, see what the students come up with?
That's quite a large house to build. It's got to fit in my car.
It could be a model.
We could build a model. Honestly, I'm taking a model. I'm pulling your leg. We could, at some stage, there will be field trips, and I guess we could build a model greenhouse and put the DHT11 sensor in there, for example, temperature and humidity, and just
smart
look at the environmental design. Yeah, and really, it's up to the kids if we'll offer project topics. And if that inspires them, we follow it. At the moment, we're dealing with youngsters, and some of them, we're still teasing out to them, what do you like doing when you're not at school? We've got to get them off gaming. That's the other thing. I mean, I'm not anti-gaming, but when you look at time management, and I mean, what we did as a kid, we spent our time in kind of a tactile environment. We did a lot more, and we learned a lot more. We didn't waste so much time on gaming. I'm going to sound pretty old when I say that, but
I've got to agree with you as well. Like I see it now with my kids, and like getting them out is a big challenge. Our parents never had the problem they had to deal with. Yeah, great.
Okay, there's a lot to do, and we'll get the drones going as well. Get those drones flying.
Yeah, I think that's big fun. That's good fun. And it gets you out of the house as well. I did a drone course last August, I think, and it was probably the first project that I've done that actually got me out of my lab and into a park. And I got the kids there as well.
I'm following your course. I mean, you built the quadcopter, and I've just stuck a couple of arms on it and called it a hexacopter. So Well, it's the same thing, really, isn't it? So I'll follow that course over the summer and see how it goes.
Yeah, that's why I like these technologies that do get you out and combine technology with the outdoors. And
exactly.
That's a good combination. Well, I think we just hit an hour, so I'd like to ask you for any closing remarks, maybe some advice for people in your position. Say the kids are growing, they want to do some more tech innovation, making stuff with them, maybe in collaboration with the local school, or any advice in general that you might have.
Okay. One tip would be, if your kids are interested in coding, make sure, well, the schools usually have coding classes. That's the first thing you do. Get them coding. There's like a Code Club Aotearoa. There's the Khan Academy. Gosh, I'm thinking there's quite a few online courses you can do. Yeah. Making. Not every family are makers these days because, I mean, they're professionals, lawyers, doctors, you name it. So there's not really a workshop that we had back in my day. So perhaps, how would you overcome that? You can take them to a makerspace, for example. There's Tap Lab. There's community centres that Auckland Council have opened. There's a place called Tap Lab in Te Atatu, that's in Auckland. There's some out East Auckland and West Auckland and Wesley. So look for the maker clubs and get involved, really. Maybe lobby the schools into opening a makerspace in the school. They're quite easy to create. So yeah, there's a lot you can do as a parent to talk to the school, and hopefully the school will collaborate and be open-minded.
Yep, there's opportunities everywhere. It definitely does, yeah. And as you said earlier, like even if you do pitch this to a school, the school doesn't really have to run it. The teachers don't really have to put any time there. I'm sure the community, the local universities will be very interested in providing the expertise and the time to help out.
Oh, yeah. And I guess if you're in Auckland, just drop me a line as well. My email is nigel.cartmell@gmail.com. That's where it is at the moment. We've started a company as well, funny enough. We're now Create Innovation Limited. Okay. So the Auckland Mini-makers fit under that, but I haven't got the web page up and running. So the idea in the future, we'll build stuff and maybe sell it. That's something else that the kids might learn. That if they perfect something, it's something that they can be sold. It could be sold online, and they can get some pocket money for it.
It can be monetized. They become entrepreneurs, and you get them into a whole new, area of, I think, like innovation and entrepreneurship. A whole area of knowledge that I suppose schools just ignore. But there you go.
Yeah, they're starting to. They're starting to embrace that. I mean, kids are native traders from day one. You see them selling orange juice on the footpath. They role play. So yeah, as soon as I mentioned money that next year here's another thing parents could do: find out where the science fairs or science competitions are and work backwards. Encourage schools to enter in science contests. Yeah. At the moment, we're preparing the kids, the mini-makers, for Niwa Sci-Fair and Bright Sparks next year, September next year. Hopefully, most of them might get there. They're still fairly young. We'll see how that works, but it's a goal.
That's in Auckland, right?
That's right. That's in Auckland. So I'd say the kids are ready, and that they're growing up quickly.
Awesome.
They're maturing quickly, and I'd say intermediate school they'll be ready for it. I'm hoping most of them will be ready to enter something just as a trial, and then the following year, 2019, they'll be dead keen, especially if there's $1,000 prize money. I mentioned that to them actually. I said, "Oh, who's up for $1,000?" And everyone just went mad. They went ape. Ooh, so. They respond well to money.
Nothing that beats a little motivation. Like imagine the cross between doing something that you actually really love doing, like making stuff, and there's a little bit of money in it. It just makes it doubly good.
Yeah, it makes $1 per day pocket money sort of nothing.
Yeah,
they get serious. They think of thousands of million. That's really amazing.
It's all relevant.
They're lovely kids. They're lovely kids. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Nigel. Really appreciate picking your brain and your experience in all this. I think you're doing an amazing thing there. The kids are very lucky to have you. And let's see how we go next year. We'll be in touch.
I'm looking forward to it. It may be a slight drop off, I'd say beginning of next year, because getting the kids to the workshops is one thing, but we'll see. We might have some new ones. We'll box on. Again, we're more concerned about quality of the workshops, and we can still operate on 8. It doesn't matter. We don't need 24. We don't need to boast about numbers. Put it that way. That's not what we're after.
That's right.
Yeah, we'll see. But I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot to look forward to.
No, it's awesome stuff. And who knows what you can come up, or the kind of projects that you're going to come up with next year. And I think the kids are also going to start proposing and working on projects that you perhaps haven't thought of, going to bring their own ideas. And that's the idea, isn't it?
They are. And one of the boys, for example, he said, I want to be an electrical engineer when I grow up. There you go. That's what,
Tick that
that's
box.
one of the questions from last week.
Success. Tick that box of success.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how that goes. He might change his mind, but he may be one of these professionals who can wear 2 hats, a bit like David Hayes, with architecture. He can write his own app. You never know.
Oh, the skills can be transferred to so many different things. So anything you learn in the makerspace is something that you can carry with you for a long time, no matter what you do. Even if you become a lawyer, I think it's going to be useful.
Exactly.
It's just a kind of logic.
Exactly. Particularly when you're dealing with people, client base, So yeah, there's certainly a lot of scope out there. I think coding is going to be as important as, well, how do you say? It's probably more important than learning a foreign language. It's It might be as important as your job. It might be part of your job.
It's a new literacy. Got to talk to computers in the language.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Well, good chatting to you, Peter, and nice meeting you, Marcus. So we'll be in touch soon, I guess.
We will be.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay. All right, Andrew. Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to our email address, questions@stemiverse.com, and we'd be happy to answer them. Do you want us to interview someone in particular? Let us know. Visit us at stemiverse.com to get the show notes of every episode. And subscribe on iTunes by searching for the name of our podcast, Stemiverse. That is STEMIVERSE. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.